If the president looked you in the eye and said, "Order the troops to shoot protesters in the legs," would you obey? That's the blunt question Rep. Jill Tokuda fired at Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and his answer, or rather his refusal to give one, reveals something far bigger about power, democracy, and where the lines of authority are being tested in America right now.
Here now recognizes the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Tokuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree we've had many performances today, but what we'd like is some answers. Mr. Secretary, did you invite Elon Musk for a briefing on war plans with China to the Pentagon? Yes or no is simple.
There's been a lot of hyperbole and incorrect reporting around that situation, but we did invite Elon over to come talk to us generally, but there was no war plans being discussed.
Okay, so whose idea was it to invite him to the Pentagon for a briefing? You mentioned you served at the pleasure of the president. Was it the president's will to have him come and be briefed?
Well, as you know, at that time, Elon Musk was leading up DOGE efforts, and we've taken a great investment in DOGE at DOD, and so getting his input on how we make DOD more efficient makes a great deal of sense.
Okay, but don't you think it's a conflict of interest for the world's richest man? Many of the contracts that the DOD is engaged in, billions of dollars of contracts going to his company, and he is, as to your point, was leading DOGE, which was involved in cutting hundreds of contracts, but also becoming intimately aware of the platforms and the requirements that would be given out for new contracts. Did you not think it was a conflict of interest to invite someone with financial interests into the Pentagon to have firsthand knowledge of what they could then bid on for their own, enrichment?
Ma'am, it was just an informal discussion, but I'll tell you, anyone that knows our Defense Department knows we show no preference to any company other than what your capabilities are, and we're grateful for the places where his companies benefit our national defense.
So for a $280 million donation, the world's richest man with companies intimately linked and involved in billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense gain access into the Pentagon. So would you say that any company right now that has multi-billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense has access to the Pentagon right now? 1-hour briefings with you, personally.
On the regular basis,
the answer
I meet with many people and many different companies and many different aspects of our defense industrial base to ensure we have the best possible capabilities. It would be imprudent to do
Well, I'm sure for an investment of $280 million, Elon's investors are quite happy that it's come out into the billions. I want to jump questions right now. Mr. Secretary, on January 6, 2021, rioters and looters attacked federal law enforcement officials, vandalized and destroyed federal government property, and caused an estimated $2.7 billion in damages right here at the Capitol. Would you have sent the National Guard and the Marines in on that day?
Well, unfortunately, President Trump requested the National Guard in advance, and that was...
It took him quite a long time. I'm asking you, as Secretary of Defense, would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day? We had 140 Capitol Police officers injured. One died the next day. Would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines?
As I said, President Trump directed National Guard to be there in advance.
And I think you can look at the record of how long it actually took for him to actually send them in. But it's good to hear that it sounds like you would have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day in which the insurrection was taking place right here at the Capitol. Mr. Secretary, during your confirmation hearing, you failed to deny the conclusion that you would carry out an order to shoot protesters in the legs. So let me be direct. Given what we are seeing across the country right now, would you carry out or issue an order by the president for our military to fire upon protesters actively engaging in their civil right to exercise free speech, their First Amendment rights? Would you give that order from the president?
I assume you're insinuating what's going on in Los Angeles, and I wouldn't call
Not just
that a
Los
peaceful
Angeles.
protest.
If we take a look at protests throughout the country, it's a simple question. If directed by the president, would you order our military to fire upon protesters? Simple yes or no.
Ma'am, we have, as you know, and as this committee knows, we have standard rules of engagement that are in place that give guidance to our troops, and they abide by them.
I'm asking what you would do. Again, you said you serve at the pleasure of the president. Is that not true?
I do serve at the pleasure.
So if the president told you to shoot people in the legs, would you do so? Now, you failed to answer this question as well in your confirmation hearing when asked by members of the Senate.
Because I refuse to accept a false hypothetical that's attempting to put me in a corner and make it look like a
At
representation.
a time when we have more Marines and
standard
National
rules of
Guard in
engagement
Los
and they're
Angeles than
followed.
we do in Syria and Iran alone, I don't think this is a hypothetical. This is an actual situation that we are dealing with right now. So again, I will ask the question, the last 14 seconds I have, would you order our military to shoot at their fellow countrymen if ordered by the president?
I think it's interesting that for 4 years, insurrection was the left's
I think we
favorite
know your
word,
answer. Thank you, Mr.
and
Chair.
that
I
when
yield
it's
back.
invoked in L.A., they were
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady's time's expired.
Imagine sitting in Congress and hearing a lawmaker ask the Secretary of Defense point blank, if the president told you to shoot people in the legs, would you? That's not political theater. That's a question that cuts straight to the foundations of American democracy. Who holds power, and what limits exist on that power? Representative Jill Tokuda didn't ask this for shock value. She asked it because history shows us what happens when military leaders blur the line between lawful command and blind obedience. Here's what makes this moment so important. In America, we have something called the Posse Comitatus Act, a law that's been on the books since 1878. It says the military cannot be used for routine law enforcement inside the United States unless Congress or the Constitution explicitly allows it. The reason is simple. Our founders and generations after them understood that a military loyal to one person instead of the rule of law is a direct path to tyranny. There are exceptions, like the Insurrection Act, which presidents can invoke to deploy troops domestically, but those powers are supposed to be rare, extraordinary, and used to preserve order, not crush dissent. So when Tokuda pressed Pete Hegseth, she wasn't just being dramatic. She was probing the unspoken. Will you uphold the law and the Constitution if pressured by a president to go beyond it? And the truth is, Hegseth didn't give her a clear yes or no. Instead, he leaned on generic rules of engagement and brushed it off as a false hypothetical. That refusal might sound like just politics, but it leaves a dangerous ambiguity. Why? Because military law itself, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, says service members must disobey unlawful orders. Following an unlawful order isn't a defense. I was just following orders was rejected all the way back at the Nuremberg trials after World War II. That principle became international law precisely because history showed the dangers of unquestioned obedience. Let's connect this to today. We've seen protests across the country, from Black Lives Matter marches to recent demonstrations in Los Angeles, people exercising their First Amendment rights to speech and assembly. In those moments, the role of government isn't to silence them with force, but to protect their right to speak, even when it's uncomfortable. So when Tokuda asked, if the president told you to order troops to fire on those protesters, would you obey? That wasn't abstract. That was rooted in real tensions happening right now. This is also why oversight hearings like this matter. They force public officials to answer, under oath, questions that go beyond policy and into the heart of constitutional duty. A clear answer, no, I would refuse an unlawful order, would have reassured the country. The absence of that clarity leaves room for worry. Would loyalty to a president outweigh loyalty to the Constitution? And there's another layer here. In the very same hearing, questions came up about Elon Musk's access to the Pentagon. A billionaire with billions in defense contracts meeting privately with top defense leaders naturally raises questions about conflicts of interest. Who gets access? Who influences decisions? And when the world's richest man can walk into the Pentagon for a discussion, it reinforces why transparency and accountability are essential. Because public trust doesn't just hinge on military restraint, but also on ensuring national security decisions aren't swayed by private gain. So what's the takeaway for you watching this at home? It's not just about one question in one hearing. It's about the bigger lesson. Democratic systems only survive if leaders make their commitments to the law crystal clear. The Posse Comitatus Act, the Insurrection Act, the UCMJ, these aren't just legal footnotes. They are the guardrails keeping us from sliding into a system where military power is turned inward against the very people it's meant to defend. The moment a Secretary of Defense hesitates on whether they'd follow an unlawful order, even in theory, is a moment worth paying attention to. Because ambiguity in leadership doesn't just live in transcripts, it shapes how history unfolds. And that's why this matters, because the question Jill Tokuda asked is really the question for all of us. When power pushes past the limits of law, who stands up and says no? If you found this breakdown valuable, hit like so more people see it. Subscribe for more deep dives into the hearings that shape our democracy. And let me know in the comments, do you think officials should be forced to give clear yes or no answers in hearings like this? Or is the ambiguity unavoidable? I'd love to hear your thoughts.